Hey gang, it's Squill, and welcome to the first episode of my big Steven Universe Retrospective. A series in which I go through and discuss Steven Universe season by season, just like I did for Adventure Time. Unlike Adventure Time, however, I didn't actually get into Steven Universe until relatively recently. I did watch it a bit when it started airing, but only got up to about episode 20-ish, and then I sorta dropped it. I don't know, I think as a kid I might have found Steven himself to be kind of annoying, or maybe it was because I had a friend who didn't like the show and that sort of rubbed off on me. Either way, I didn't get around to watching Steven Universe until around 2022, a couple years after the show had ended. I definitely considered giving the show a second chance while it was currently airing. However, I think learning about just how intense the fandom was at the time kinda scared me off from it. But hey, enough stalling. This is Steven Universe Season 1. I think the first thing to note about Season 1 of Steven Universe is that it is a long season, with a whopping 52 episodes. It is the Steven Universe equivalent to Season 5 of Adventure Time. Kinda. You see, the rest of the series, barring Future, was also ordered in these big 50-something episode batches. However, unlike Season 1, these production seasons were split in half. So Production Season 2 is split into Broadcast Seasons 2 and 3, and Production Season 3 becomes Broadcast Seasons 4 and 5. Plus a few extra episodes added at the end of Season 5 after the show got cancelled. It's similar to how the later seasons of Adventure Time were split up to make 10 seasons rather than just 9. It's simply done to make the show seem longer than it actually is. It becomes pretty obvious at the end of Season 2 when the season sorta just ends in the middle of an arc that gets followed up on at the start of Season 3. But going back to Season 1, this makes this the only full production season of the show, not counting Future. And ironically, because of that, it does sort of feel like two separate seasons stitched together, with the two-parter Mirror and Ocean Gem acting as the mid-season finale. Needless to say, the second half of Season 1 is quite a bit stronger than its first half. Whereas Season 1A is mostly spent establishing Steven, the Gems, and Beach City, 1B is allowed to play around more with the characters and stories. Season 1 is probably the most lighthearted season of Steven Universe, especially in its first half, with a stronger emphasis on comedy and goofy character moments. Of course, the drama is still here, this is still Steven Universe at the end of the day, but it's a lot more downplayed compared to later seasons. There's almost sort of a Monster of the Week element to Season 1, where a good chunk of episodes feature Steven and the Gems taking on some sort of threat. But these types of episodes are balanced out well with good character-focused stories. Some episodes even manage to combine the Monster of the Week formula with its character-focused narratives. But one aspect that Season 1 of Steven Universe absolutely nails is its horror. This can certainly be said for Steven Universe as a whole, but Season 1 especially is not afraid to get freaky. Don't you just love watching Steven's body get taken over by a bunch of cat heads? Or what about Amethyst being mutilated beyond belief? Lots of body horror this season. Of course, all of these episodes still end on a pleasant enough note, thus not breaking the show's lighthearted tone. But I still respect that the show was willing to go there, and so early in its run too. It took Adventure Time until around Season 3 to start getting into its horror. With the exception of Future, I'd argue that Season 1 of Steven Universe is the most Steven-centric season. Of course, you could argue that every season is Steven-centric, the show literally takes place from his perspective only. But more than any other season, Season 1 feels the most focused on Steven's growth and development, having Steven learn and gain new abilities throughout the course of the season, as well as learning more about the Gems in general. By the end of the season, Steven really proves himself as a worthy member of the Crystal Gems. Season 1 is almost Steven's Batman Begins in a way, it's his origin story. The Steven we see at the start of Season 1 is vastly different from the Steven we see at the end of Season 1. But speaking of Steven learning about the Gems, that's another thing I want to talk about. One of my absolute favorite aspects of Steven Universe is the way it conveys new information to the audience. I think it's so genius because it's not like just one big reveal changes everything. It's more like a bunch of smaller details that slowly build to us having a greater understanding of this world and these characters' histories. Let's take Rose Quartz for example. For a good chunk of the season, all we see of Rose is through pictures and hearing other characters talk about her. But through the other gems, mostly Pearl, we hear just how much Rose loved life on Earth and how much she did to protect it. Which makes it all the more impactful when we finally hear Rose talk in Lion 3 straight to video. And then after that, we get a full-on Greg and Rose flashback episode in the form of Story for Steven, the first of quite a few flashback episodes throughout the series. Garnet and her future vision is another great example of this. We see Garnet use her future vision at multiple points throughout the season, but it isn't until the episode titled Future Vision that we actually understand how this ability works. We then see Steven briefly use this ability in Winter Forecast. This culminates in the reveal at the end of the season that Garnet herself is a fusion, and that her future vision comes from Sapphire. Just incredibly smart world building that's able to keep the audience so consistently engaged. Another thing I absolutely love about Steven Universe is the fact that it's not afraid to show its characters in a negative light. Pearl, for example, is so attached to her past with Rose that she has trouble finding her identity without her. Amethyst generally doesn't take things very seriously and ends up hurting others because of that. And Garnet can be so focused on the bigger picture that she loses sight of how other people feel. I really love that the gems are all shown with their own flaws and insecurities. It makes them feel so much more human. Despite the fact that they're all immortal gems, they're still learning and growing just like real people. Along those lines, I've also noticed that there's a bit of a trend this season of the gems themselves not always getting along with each other. Pearl and Garnet are against Amethyst and Steven wrestling in Tiger Millionaire. Pearl and Amethyst are at each other's throats throughout most of Giant Woman. Pearl is against Garnet and Amethyst fusing in Coach Steven. Steven, Pearl, and Amethyst form a secret team against Garnet in Secret Team. Amethyst and Pearl have a big fight in On the Run. And Pearl lashes out against Garnet and Amethyst in Rose's Scabbard. I guess most of these are Pearl against Amethyst now that I think about it. They really go at each other this season. But again, I like having a bit more variety to the dynamics between the gems. They're not this perfect team who get along all the time. And on that note, let's talk about the characters in Season 1. I already talked a little bit about Steven's growth throughout the season earlier on in this video, but I still have a little bit more I have to say about him. I love how dedicated the show is to Steven being somewhat incompetent, especially near the beginning. Steven screws up a lot here, which is realistic given that he's just a kid and that he's new to these gem adventures. But these make his moments of triumph all the more satisfying. I guess I should talk a little bit about the whole Steven perspective rule. Basically, the rule is that the entire show must take place from Steven's perspective. The audience can't gain any information without Steven also gaining said information. While I do think this rule will begin to limit the show in its later seasons, it actually works quite well for Season 1. Because again, the whole season is about Steven's growth and development as a crystal gem. Because the season is so Steven focused, it makes sense to only see things from his perspective. They do kinda break this rule in Jailbreak during the Stronger Than You sequence. I know they show Steven watching it on the monitor, but that only happens midway through the song. There's no way Steven saw everything before that point. Alongside Steven, Season 1 does an excellent job characterizing Pearl. She's sort of portrayed as the uptight mom of the group, but obviously with much more depth than that. She is the elegant one, the one who keeps everything all neat and tidy. She's also low-key one of the funniest characters in the show. Pearl is a neurodivergent icon. But easily the most important aspect of Pearl's character is her grief over Rose. Pearl is a character who defined herself by her relationship with Rose, and is now unsure of who she is without her. And Pearl's grief manifests itself at multiple points throughout the season. The show does a great job showing how Pearl's obsession over Rose hurts her relationship with Steven, while still making her an entirely sympathetic character. She's definitely one of my favorites. Now let's talk about Amethyst. On the surface, Amethyst can definitely be seen as the comic relief of the group. She is the loud, laid-back, and messy one. If the show wants any of its characters to be a bad influence on Steven, it's gonna be Amethyst. But the show does a great job pulling back the layers of Amethyst's character to show her more insecure sides. That being that she's the youngest gem and considers herself to be a mistake. She's definitely the gem with the least amount figured out. I could easily see Amethyst being an annoying character, but thankfully the show gives her enough depth for that to not be the case. Last but not least, we have Garnet. Garnet is the muscle of the group, the strong and silent type, if you will. And because of that, she's definitely the most closed-off member of the group. But at the same time, the show still does an excellent job showing off Garnet's loving and caring side. And it's clear that the only reason why Garnet remains less emotionally vulnerable is to balance out the rest of the group. But at the same time, Garnet is definitely a force to be reckoned with. If the show ever wants to show off just how alien the gems are, Garnet is basically their go-to example. Especially with that freaky third eye of hers, yeesh. Garnet is awesome, and another one of my favorite characters. Overall, Season 1 is an excellent start to Steven Universe. While the first half of the season is pretty solid, the season absolutely shines in its second half. In fact, I might even go as far as to say that Season 1B might be my favorite run of episodes in the entire series. It is seriously banger episode after banger episode, though obviously this opinion is subject to change when I rewatch the later seasons for future retrospectives. The show does such an excellent job building out its characters and world this early on. By the end of the season, you are fully engaged in where their stories go from here. I am definitely very excited to talk about the later seasons of Steven Universe. But first, we have a Season 1 top 10 list we need to do. Season 1 is a big season with a ton of amazing episodes in it, so it'll be interesting to see what cracks the top 10. Please let me know how you feel about Season 1 in the comments, and have a good one. Squill out.